When I was a kid, I always thought the national park near our hometown was magical. In daylight, the woods looked like something out of a postcard, winding trails beneath tall evergreens, the sound of water trickling over stones, the smell of pine needles baking under the sun. But every adult I knew warned me about the tree line at night. Hikers called it the Wall of Dark, a point where the trees grow so dense you can desky. Old locals whispered a saying that never left my head: never follow the light past the tree line. I thought it was just a story to keep kids from wandering off, until years later. At 22, my cousin Liam and I decided to camp deeper into the forest than we'd ever gone. We wanted a real wilderness weekend, no tourists, no busy campground noise. Liam had borrowed an old folded park map from a ranger friend. He pointed to a thin dotted trail that curved toward a small creek. "Here," he said. "We'll be away from everyone." The hike took hours. As we moved off the main path, the gravel gave way to dirt tangled with roots, the sunlight dimming as the canopy thickened overhead. By the time we reached the creek, the forest felt different, quieter, as if it were listening. We pitched our tent by the creek. As dusk settled in, the woods turned shadowy blue, then black. Our small campfire threw out just enough warmth and light to paint flickering shapes on the surrounding tree trunks. Around 1:15 a.m., I woke up with a strange feeling like someone was watching me through the fabric of the tent. At first I thought Liam had stepped out to fix the fire, because a soft orange glow was moving across the side of the tent. But when I turned my head, Liam was still inside, asleep, his breathing slow and even. I whispered his name. The glow outside drifted between the trees, steady, deliberate, as if carried by someone walking without hurry. But there were no footsteps. Not a single crunch of dry leaves. I gently shook Liam awake. "Hey, there's a light outside." He blinked groggy, then peered toward the fabric of the tent. The glow passed again like an old lantern swaying at arm's length. We crouched there, frozen, listening to the silence that pressed against the thin walls of the tent. I unzipped the flap a few inches and peeked out. The glow paused. It just hovered in the air, 20 feet away. Then, instead of fading out, it slid sideways behind a tree, as though whoever held it had stepped out of view. We didn't move for the rest of the night. At some point, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell asleep sitting up, clutching the flashlight. At dawn, we forced ourselves to check the spot. The ground was damp with dew, no footprints, no lantern, no sign anyone had been there. But above us, on a low branch, hung a rust-colored iron hook. It wasn't there the night before, at least we didn't see it. The hook swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. We packed up in uneasy silence and started the long hike back to the main trail. About halfway down, I stopped and turned for one last look at the dark tree line. In the faint distance between the trunks, I caught a brief spark of orange, like a single ember drifting deeper into the woods. Then it blinked out, swallowed by the shadows. I was 26 when I decided to take my younger brother Nate on a weekend backpacking trip to a remote national forest preserve about 3 hours from our hometown. We'd both been stressed, me from work, him from school, so we planned this as a peaceful escape. The forest is famous for its river-carved canyon walls, old-growth pines, and star-filled skies. What I didn't realize is how empty and quiet it becomes once the sun goes down. We arrived late in the afternoon, parked at the ranger station, and signed in on the overnight camping sheet. The ranger on duty warned us that once we crossed the wooden bridge over the river, we'd lose cell reception. I joked that it sounded nice, no calls, no distractions. He just smiled but added, "Stick to the trail." Sound carries weird in the canyon at night. The trailhead started right at that bridge. The water below was a milky green, rushing hard from recent rain, and the sound of the river quickly faded as we climbed the switchback trail that led into the forest. For the first 2 miles, we saw no one. The deeper we went, the more muffled the world felt, the towering canyon walls almost swallowing up our footsteps. Our campsite for the night was a small backcountry clearing by a waterfall pool about 5 miles in. We reached it at golden hour. Sunlight was just brushing the tips of the cliffs, and the roar of the waterfall echoed around us. We set up the tent, built a small cooking fire, and ate freeze-dried meals while bats began darting overhead. Just after sundown, as we were sitting near the fire talking about nothing important, we both heard it. A long, thin whistle like someone blowing across the top of a bottle, high-pitched but soft. It came from somewhere upriver, behind the curtain of the waterfall. It lasted maybe 5 seconds and then stopped. We exchanged a glance. Probably the wind, Nate said. I nodded, trying to believe it, though the air was still and heavy. By 10 o'clock, the canyon was swallowed in darkness. Even with our headlamps, we could barely see the outline of the ridge above. We let the fire burn down to glowing coals and sat listening to the waterfall's steady white noise roar. That's when the whistle came again, sharper, louder, and closer. It rose, held for a beat, and cut off abruptly, almost as if whoever or whatever had been holding their breath. A minute later, we heard it again from a different direction, this time downstream. We turned off the lantern to listen, the embers painting everything in faint red. Another whistle now behind us near the tree line. Okay, that's weird, Nate whispered. I tried to sound calm. Maybe there's another campsite nearby, but in the ranger station's sign-in sheet, there had only been one other party, scheduled for a completely different trail. We sat frozen listening. No wind, no crickets, just the waterfall. And every few minutes, that thin whistle floating out of the darkness, always from a slightly new spot, as if circling us. Around midnight, we both decided we weren't going to sleep like this. We were rolling up the sleeping pads when we heard slow, deliberate footsteps, the dry crunch of leaves somewhere behind the tent. We swung our flashlights toward the sound. Only trees and fogged breath in the beam, nothing moving. The moment we lowered the lights, another crunch now to our left. I called out, "Hello? We're just campers out here." Silence. Even the waterfall seemed quieter for a heartbeat. We stomped out the fire until the embers hissed and grabbed our packs. As we started for the trail back, Nate froze and pointed across the pool at the base of the waterfall. On the opposite bank, high on the rock wall, a single white light was gliding from left to right. Not a flashlight beam sweeping, more like a lantern being carried slowly by an unseen figure. But there was no ledge, no trail, just sheer vertical rock. The light hovered for a few seconds, then dimmed until it blinked out entirely. That was the last straw. We switched on our headlamps and began hiking back down the trail, at first fast walking, then almost jogging. Every 100 feet or so, the whistle would echo again, sometimes ahead of us, sometimes behind us, never right beside us, but always near enough to keep us on edge. Halfway back, we reached a wooden footbridge over the narrowest part of the river. As I stepped onto the bridge, the whistle shrilled again, this time directly beneath us, as though someone were standing on the rocks in the river below. Nate shone his light down through the gaps between the planks. Only black rushing water. We didn't linger. By the time we saw the faint glow of the ranger's cabin lantern through the trees, it was past 2 in the morning. The ranger came out onto the porch, puzzled to see us back early. He told us no one else had checked in that day and that the trail to the waterfall had been officially empty except for us. I laughed nervously and said, "Guess the canyon has a way of playing tricks." But to this day, every time I hear someone casually whistling, my stomach knots. That night, the sound wasn't cheerful. It was like something was answering itself from every corner of the woods, closing in a little closer each time. Last October, as the autumn leaves were just starting to turn, I joined a weekend hiking trip organized by a small outdoor club in my town. We'd planned for months to see the famous mountain ridge overlooking a national wilderness reserve, known for dramatic sunrises above the mist-filled valleys. There were 7 of us in total, 4 men, 3 women, all in our late 20s to early 30s. We began the hike late in the afternoon so we could reach the ridge by sunset and set up camp for the night. The trail wound steadily upward for miles, surrounded by towering spruce and moss-covered boulders. As we climbed higher, the air grew cooler and the forest thinned until we finally broke out onto the ridgeline itself, a long spine of rock and grass overlooking miles of rolling blue-green hills. By the time we dropped our packs at a grassy clearing, the sun was already touching the horizon. The western sky glowed tangerine and violet. To the east, the valleys below were filling with soft silver mist that looked like an ocean of clouds. As we pitched our tents and set up a small fire ring, Mia, one of the more observant hikers, pointed toward a neighboring ridge about a quarter-mile away. Standing there, just visible against the fading orange sky, was a lone human-shaped figure. At that distance we couldn't make out any features, only a dark silhouette, tall and thin, standing utterly still. We waved and shouted a friendly hello, but the figure didn't react. A breeze lifted the grass around it, yet it never shifted or waved back. After a few minutes, the silhouette turned slowly as though looking down the opposite slope, then stepped out of view behind a cluster of rocks and was gone. We assumed it was just another backpacker enjoying the sunset from a different spot. Night on the ridge is colder than you'd expect. By 9 o'clock we were bundled in jackets, sitting in a loose circle around the campfire, swapping stories as sparks drifted into the dark. A thin veil of fog crept upward from the valley, curling between the pines until our firelight felt like a small island in a gray sea. Around midnight, while most of us were still awake, we began to hear soft crunching sounds in the grass, faint but rhythmic, coming from the dark beyond the ring of firelight. We aimed our headlamps toward the sound. Nothing, just mist and tree trunks. The noise would stop every time we shone our lights, then resume a minute later from a different direction, as if something or someone was circling the campsite just beyond sight. By 1 in the morning, the others crawled into their tents, leaving me and Mia tending the dwindling fire. The fog had thickened so much that even the nearest pine trees looked like ghostly pillars. Mia suddenly gripped my sleeve and whispered, "Look by that tree." I followed her gaze and froze. About 30 feet away, barely visible through the mist, was a dark, upright shape taller than a man standing at the edge of the tree line. It looked like the same silhouette we'd seen at sunset, motionless, watching. I called out, "Hey, do you need help finding your campsite?" No answer. The shape didn't move. A drift of fog rolled between us for just a second. When it cleared, the figure was gone, as though it had melted back into the trees. We sat the rest of the night by the fire, neither of us daring to retreat into the tents. At dawn we roused the others, relieved to see the sun burning the mist away. While packing up, we noticed something unsettling. In the damp grass around our fire pit was a faint but unbroken ring of footprints, as if someone wearing heavy boots had walked an entire circle around us while we slept. The prints were larger than any of ours. We set off down the trail, eager to reach the parking lot. About halfway down, Mia stopped and looked back over her shoulder. Her face went pale. "Up there," she whispered. High above on the crest of a far ridge that overlooked the switchback trail, we could just make out a tall, solitary figure, standing against the brightening sky, again perfectly still, facing us. We all saw it. No one said a word. A moment later, a gust of mountain wind bent the grass on the ridgetop, and the figure simply wasn't there anymore. When we finally reached the trailhead, no one even suggested reporting it. We couldn't describe what we'd seen in any concrete way. Since then, whenever I hike to a ridgeline and see the valleys fill with fog, I find myself scanning every distant crest, half expecting to spot that silent watcher again, waiting, as if keeping count of those who pass beneath.